Again, just because something looks a little bit different to you, you have to put a label on it, right?
Well, if the place fits.
Hollywood pretends its secrets are new, but the oldest ones are always hiding in plain sight. Rob Reiner wasn't just a director. He wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just Hollywood legacy. He was the rare industry figure who could shape culture from two angles at once: the work you watched and the world you didn't see.
From generation to generation, Spinal Taps, they still watch that. When Harry Met Sally, people watch that, so.
For 3 decades, Reiner lived like a man with two passports, one for Hollywood, one for Washington. One identity built hits, careers, and nostalgia. The other built influence, alliances, and policies. One worked through scripts, box offices, and awards. The other worked through strategy rooms, donor networks, and political chess. It wasn't a scandalous double life. It was a strategic one. Hollywood gave him fame. Politics gave him power. Most celebrities choose one. Reiner chose both. Quietly, the media always covered Rob Reiner as a director with opinions. What they never covered was a political architect with reach. People saw When Harry Met Sally. They didn't see the meetings, the lobbying, the influence machines, the campaigns, the ideological infrastructure he helped build in the shadows of the entertainment industry. Hollywood sells characters. DC buys narratives. Reiner learned to manufacture both. And for 30 years, nobody connected the two identities. Until now. Hollywood has always been obsessed with transformation. Actors transform into characters. Directors transform stories into worlds. Studios transform money into magic. That's the part everyone sees. The part nobody pays attention to is the transformation that happens off camera, the transformation of influence. Rob Reiner entered Hollywood through the front door, the celebrity door, the family door, the creative door. Born into entertainment lineage, raised in the gravitational pull of show business, Reiner didn't have to fight for access. Access was the currency already waiting for him, but access alone doesn't create a double life. Access only gives you the first identity, the public one. For most of America, Rob Reiner's identity was obvious. All in the Family, The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. His career became a timeline of films that didn't just entertain, they embedded themselves into the cultural bloodstream. His movies became references, quotes, emotional memories, first dates, film classes, nostalgia anchors, and network syndication trophies. That's one kind of power, the kind that makes you beloved. But there's another kind of power, the kind that doesn't make you beloved, it makes you effective. That power doesn't live in the box office. It lives in the back rooms, the fundraisers, the think tanks, the advisory circles, the donor networks, the political action committees, and the phone calls that aren't recorded for entertainment history, but for strategy. Reiner didn't switch identities. He layered them. His Hollywood identity gave him cultural legitimacy. His political identity gave him operational reach. Most entertainers flirt with activism. They give speeches, sign petitions, align with causes, donate to campaigns, host galas. It's performative participation, activism with velvet ropes and camera flashes. Reiner didn't choose that path. His political life didn't resemble celebrity activism. It resembled institutional participation, real participation, the kind where policy isn't reacted to, it's shaped. And that's why so few people realized what he was doing. Hollywood glamorizes loud opinions. Washington rewards quiet influence. Reiner understood both ecosystems. He understood that Hollywood sells narratives to the public, while politics sells narratives to the future. The real power lies in who writes those narratives first. The shift began subtly. Reiner's films were never apolitical, even before the political identity became explicit. A Few Good Men wasn't just courtroom drama, it was a meditation on authority, secrecy, ethics, and chain of command. The American President wasn't just a rom-com, it was an argument for idealistic governance disguised as charm. Hollywood wrote it off as creative preference. Washington didn't. It wasn't the themes that mattered, it was the fluency. Reiner didn't treat politics like a cause, he treated it like a language. The double life didn't demand secrecy, it demanded compartmentalization. The public continued consuming the Hollywood identity without noticing the parallel track forming behind it. While Reiner publicly directed films, he privately directed influence, joining political organizations, shaping messaging infrastructures, building coalitions, operating inside social machinery that looked less like Hollywood networking and more like strategic planning. The most fascinating part isn't that Reiner entered politics. Celebrities do that often. The fascination is how quietly it happened and how long it lasted without cultural recognition. 30 years is an eternity in American politics. Presidents come and go, parties shift strategies, media environments mutate, public opinions crack and reset. Reiner survived all of it without ever becoming a politician, without running for office, without becoming a caricature, without losing the cultural legitimacy that Hollywood had gifted him. Most celebrity political identities burn fast, loud, short, dramatic, polarizing. Reiner's political identity aged like institutional memory, not a burst, a slow expansion, not a scandal, a structure. That is the hallmark of a double life, the ability to inhabit two worlds without collapsing under the weight of either. The reason nobody noticed is simple. Hollywood hid the second identity by over-highlighting the first. When a celebrity succeeds creatively for decades, the public assumes the creative identity is the only one. It creates a blind spot. It makes the spectator think fame is the prize, not the disguise. But the most telling indicator wasn't Reiner's political actions. It was his political endurance. Activism is reaction. Influence is continuity. Activists shout during crises. Architects operate before and after them. Reiner operated. He built messages, networks, funding pipelines, advocacy structures, narrative framing strategies. He didn't insert himself into movements. He helped shape the preconditions for them. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't viral. It wasn't cinematic. It was infrastructure. The double life only becomes visible in hindsight, because hindsight loves pattern recognition. And patterns reveal the truth no headline ever does. Rob Reiner didn't live two lives because he was hiding. He lived two lives because he understood what Hollywood could give him, and what Washington couldn't take away. The first identity made people laugh, cry, and quote him. The second identity made people listen, align, and respond. Most people spend their lives mastering one role. Reiner spent 30 years directing two. For most celebrities, politics is a performance. You show up when the cameras are rolling, endorse the candidate who already has momentum, give a speech that sounds emotional but says nothing, and then go back to your real job. Rob Reiner didn't treat politics like a charity event. He treated it like infrastructure. And infrastructure requires three things: networks, money, and narrative. Hollywood has always been good at narrative, but it has never been good at networks. That's why studio politics are chaotic. Everyone is competing for attention instead of coordinating power. Washington operates differently. Washington understands that power isn't who speaks the loudest. It's who gets invited to the meeting before the vote is taken. Reiner spent 30 years learning that distinction, quietly moving from celebrity activist to institutional participant. The first step in the double life was access. Access isn't glamorous. It doesn't happen on red carpets or talk shows. It happens in small private rooms, small strategy dinners, fundraisers, lunches, donor circles, board meetings, and think tank environments where policy isn't argued. It's drafted. That world doesn't care about awards. It cares about influence. Hollywood gave Reiner instant social legitimacy. Washington gave him operational legitimacy. Most people only get one. Reiner got both. The second step was alignment. You can't operate politically without aligning with machinery. Activism is individual. Influence is collaborative. Reiner didn't try to become his own political brand. He embedded himself into existing political ecosystems that needed cultural amplification. Not amplification in the celebrity sense, amplification in the message management sense. Politics doesn't need stars, it needs storytellers. Reiner turned out to be a storyteller who understood scale. Most political messaging is boring. Dry language, bureaucratic tone, policy jargon, and slogans that sound like they were written by committees. Hollywood rewires the brain for entertainment value. Reiner rewired political messaging for cultural digestibility. If you can convince millions of people to care about a fictional character, you can convince them to care about an issue. Hollywood has always known that. Washington just didn't know how to operationalize it. Reiner built the bridge. The third step was institutionalization, meaning, don't just support causes, build organizations. Causes are emotional, organizations are durable. Causes collapse after the election ends, organizations survive elections. Reiner understood that politics isn't about winning votes, it's about shaping the environment in which votes are cast. That's the difference between activism and architecture. Activism raises awareness. Architecture raises outcomes. Reiner started joining and then helping build networks that could influence multiple cycles instead of single campaigns. This is where the double life got sophisticated. The public saw Rob Reiner campaigning for X, or supporting Y, or criticizing Z. They missed the machinery under those appearances: lobby structures, messaging platforms, political action networks, research arms, donor ecosystems. If Hollywood is the dream factory, Washington is the narrative refinery. Reiner learned how to operate within both and cross-pollinate them when needed. What's stunning is how well the entertainment industry hid his political identity in plain sight. Not through secrecy, but through distraction. Hollywood's public-facing persona is built on spectacle: premieres, interviews, awards, controversy, gossip. Spectacle creates a haze. The haze allows serious work to happen without scrutiny. Reiner benefited from that haze for 30 years. The public consumed the movies and ignored the meetings. The irony is that Hollywood's obsession with narrative made it blind to Reiner's other narrative, the political one. Film critics analyzed shots, scripts, aesthetics, influences. Political strategists analyzed messaging, frames, voter behavior, persuasion patterns. Reiner understood both. The average American viewer understood neither. The question that always haunts the double life is intent. What did Reiner want? Fame he already had. Wealth he already had. Respect he already had. But power is a different currency. Fame fades. Power compounds. Fame is attention. Power is outcome. Fame depends on audiences. Power depends on allies. Reiner chose allies. That choice wasn't ideological, though ideology helped justify it. It was structural. He aligned himself with institutions, not personalities. That's how you survive multiple administrations, multiple political cycles, and multiple national crises without ever being pigeonholed as a partisan attack dog. The public saw a liberal filmmaker. Washington saw an operator. And yet the double life only worked because Reiner refused to become a politician. Running for office would have destroyed the duality. The moment you campaign, you become a product, vulnerable to opposition research, scandal mining, character assassination, polling failures, and the 24-hour media machine that eats its own. Politicians must defend themselves. Operators don't. Politicians get targeted. Operators get invited. Reiner chose to shape narratives from the shadows rather than fight for headlines in the light. And that's what made the double life effective. Hollywood gave him cultural language. Politics gave him institutional strategy. Neither world fully recognized him as belonging to the other. That separation preserved the illusion that there was only one Rob Reiner. The Hollywood one. The filmmaker, the director, the legacy name. But by the time America finally caught up, the second life was fully built. A 30-year architecture of influence that had shaped policies, elections, messaging environments, voter perception, and cultural framing without ever demanding public acknowledgement. Most celebrities age out of relevance. Reiner aged into power. He didn't disappear from Hollywood. He just added a second world that Hollywood never taught its audiences to notice. The reason Rob Reiner's double life lasted 30 years wasn't because he hid it. It's because America didn't have the cultural vocabulary to recognize it. Hollywood trained the public to see celebrities as artists. Washington trained the public to see power as politics. Reiner blurred those lines before the public even knew lines existed. For most of the late 20th century and early 2000s, media treated Hollywood and Washington as different universes. One produced entertainment, the other produced policy. The irony is that both produced narratives, just for different audiences. Hollywood made narratives for viewers. Washington made narratives for voters. Reiner understood that the difference between a viewer and a voter was not ideological, it was emotional. Whoever controls emotion controls decision-making. Whoever controls decision-making controls outcomes. The Hollywood identity was the perfect camouflage for Reiner's political influence. A beloved director isn't threatening. A political strategist is. A storyteller is charming. A policy architect is intimidating. Reiner let the world see the charming identity, while the intimidating one quietly shaped machinery. That asymmetry protected him. Not from scandal, but from recognition. Media also helped shield the duality, though not intentionally. Entertainment journalism focused on box office performance, behind-the-scenes stories, casting decisions, and award campaigns. Political journalism focused on politicians, scandals, legislation, conflicts, polls, and elections. There was no media lane for Hollywood operator engaged in multi-decade influence strategy. That lane didn't exist, so nobody drove in it. The illusion was further supported by Hollywood's own mythology. Hollywood likes to imagine itself as rebellious, anti-establishment, and culturally progressive, the industry that defies power. It never acknowledges that it is power. Studios are institutions. Funding is influence. Access is hierarchy. Reiner treated Hollywood not as a dream factory, but as an influence factory. And influence factories can feed governments. There was another reason the double life went unnoticed. Reiner never became partisan in a performative way. Most celebrity political engagements involve moral declarations. Vote for X, stop Y, support Z. Reiner didn't operate as a celebrity activist, he operated as a strategist. The difference is subtle but crucial. Activists want attention. Strategists want outcomes. Attention is loud. Outcomes are quiet. That quietness is what preserved the second life. Political power hides inside continuity. Reiner's political work did not spike during election years and disappear afterward. It continued through off years, midterms, policy cycles, lobbying cycles, narrative cycles, and cultural cycles. The public only saw the headlines when elections approached. They never saw the scaffolding that made those headlines possible. That scaffolding was Reiner's real identity, the architect, not the advocate. But nothing stays invisible forever. Double lives work until the world changes. The 2010s, and especially the 2020s, broke the illusion. The separation between Hollywood and Washington collapsed. Social media accelerated politics into culture. Pop culture accelerated activism into identity. Streaming platforms dismantled traditional media hierarchies. And for the first time, the audience didn't just witness stories, they participated in them. The internet created a new kind of public that understood narrative construction. Viewers became analysts. Fans became researchers. Memes became political framing devices. TikTok and Twitter democratized the skills once reserved for campaign strategists. Reframing, messaging, discourse management, agenda setting, emotional contagion. Suddenly, voters could see the ghost architecture of influence. That's when Reiner's double life began to surface. It didn't surface because he revealed it. It surfaced because the culture finally had the lens to recognize what he had been doing all along. The audience realized that politics wasn't just legislation, it was storytelling. And storytelling was Hollywood's native language. When citizens became aware that political narratives were engineered, they started asking who engineered them. Reiner's name began appearing in conversations not as the director of X, but as the political operator who helped X campaign. The old identity didn't disappear, but the second identity caught up. And once the two identities stood side by side, the double life was no longer a double life. It was a whole picture. Another factor that exposed the duality was generational. Younger generations don't consume celebrities as untouchable icons. They consume them as participants in systems. Gen Z especially treats institutions as suspect by default, and power structures as puzzles to decode. Reiner's involvement became visible because a generation trained to see power dynamics analyzed him the same way they analyze politicians, CEOs, influencers, and moguls. The pandemic accelerated everything. Lockdowns forced people indoors with nothing but screens and information. Political news fused with entertainment news. Electoral cycles fused with cultural cycles. Voters participated in politics like it was a fandom war, complete with discourse, lore, villains, heroes, leaks, clips, and strategy. Hollywood and Washington merged into one attention economy. Reiner belonged to both economies. That made him finally visible. But even as the public began to notice the political identity, the Hollywood identity refused to disappear. That's the final secret of the double life. Both identities were real. Reiner didn't fake one to build the other. He used each to enhance the other. Hollywood gave him narrative expertise. Politics gave him narrative relevance. One built cultural imagination. The other built political consequences. The double life worked because both worlds benefited. Hollywood liked having Reiner as a legacy filmmaker and genial public figure. Washington liked having Reiner as a cultural intermediary who could translate political agendas into emotional narratives. Neither world had incentive to expose the arrangement, and the public, distracted by entertainment, exhausted by politics, and historically allergic to institutional analysis, never questioned why a filmmaker kept showing up in political spaces for 3 decades. They assumed it was personal passion. They never considered structural strategy. Only in hindsight do we recognize that Rob Reiner didn't live a double life to hide. He lived a double life to operate, and for 30 years, the operation succeeded. Reveals don't happen all at once. They are built slowly, like exposures in photography, where the image sits invisible on film until light finally makes it undeniable. Rob Reiner's double life didn't explode into public consciousness because of a scandal or a confession or a documentary. It revealed itself because the era changed. And era changes are the most powerful revelations of all. For 30 years, Reiner relied on boundaries that no longer exist. Hollywood and Washington used to be two sovereign domains, separated not by ideology, but by distance, geographical, cultural, and economic. These were two capitals of American influence that didn't need to intersect. The film industry shaped emotion. Government shaped policy. One told stories. The other enforced rules. That division was the greatest disguise Reiner ever had, not because he created it, but because he understood it. The 2020s obliterated that barrier. Politics became content. Content became politics. Candidates learned to perform. Celebrities learned to strategize. Campaigns learned to storytell. Platforms became battlegrounds. Narratives replaced arguments. Emotional contagion replaced persuasion. Memes replaced op-eds. Clips replaced debates. And the audience became the collaborator to it all. In this environment, Reiner's second life no longer looked like an anomaly. It looked like a blueprint. People began to ask new questions. Questions that didn't exist in the 1990s or early 2000s. Questions like, who crafts the political storyline? Who makes ideas emotionally digestible? Who negotiates messaging before it becomes policy? Who bridges culture to politics, not as hobby, but as machinery? In another era, these questions were inconceivable. In this era, they're obvious. And once those questions hit the mainstream, Reiner's dual identity surfaced naturally. The Hollywood persona was never fake. It was simply incomplete. The political persona was never hidden. It was simply unrecognized by a culture that lacked the literacy to decode it. The public loves to think exposures happen because someone reveals something. But most exposures happen because the audience evolves. Awareness is the true leak. And by the late 2010s and early 2020s, the audience had evolved enough to see the invisible architecture around power. This was the decade when Americans realized that politics wasn't just a contest of ideologies, it was a contest of narratives. For decades, strategists treated narratives as packaging. Hollywood treated them as product. Reiner understood both interpretations. That made him invaluable to political projects that required something more than policy arguments. They required emotional resonance. Hollywood taught him that people don't remember facts. They remember feelings. Washington taught him that feelings shape outcomes. Together, they created one of the most overlooked truths in modern power. If you control how a person feels about reality, you control what they believe about reality. Reiner wasn't just able to control belief. He could reverse engineer it. That's influence on a level few entertainers achieve and few politicians understand. The reason the reveal feels cinematic is because, in hindsight, the hints were always visible. Look at the trajectory. A director who specialized in films about morality, justice, governance, authority, institutional conflict, national identity, and personal conviction quietly transitions into a strategist who operates in the exact same thematic territory. but with real-world consequences. The films were rehearsals. Politics was implementation. Most double lives collapse when the lie can no longer sustain itself. Reiner's double life didn't collapse, it merged. Hollywood and Washington fused into one system, one economy, one power structure, one audience demographic. When the two worlds collided, Reiner no longer had to hide. The culture finally had the category for him. That was the until now, not a revelation of sin, not an unmasking of a fraud, but a cultural realization. Rob Reiner wasn't living a double life. America was living a single life that was too naive to recognize its own architecture of influence. This raises a deeper, quieter question. A question the public rarely asks, but the powerful rarely ignore. What happens when storytelling and governance stop being separate domains and become a single craft? That question isn't academic. It's existential. Democracies require narratives to function. Voters need explanation. Citizens need reasons. Societies need meaning. Politics provides rules. It does not provide meaning. Hollywood provides meaning. It does not provide rules. Reiner bridged the gap. That bridge had consequences. It altered how voters interpreted justice, leadership, conflict, American identity, moral courage, and institutional failure. It gave emotional vocabulary to political concepts that once felt sterile. It democratized access to persuasion. It made policy relatable. It made ideology cinematic. Reiner's double life also reveals something uncomfortable about American culture. We trust artists more than politicians. We believe stories before we believe policy proposals. We trust characters before we trust candidates. That trust gap creates an opening no strategist can resist, unless they don't have the talent. Reiner had the talent. When audiences finally realized the double life existed, it didn't create outrage. It created recognition. People didn't say, "How dare he?" They said, "That makes sense." And that's the real sign that a reveal is authentic. It doesn't shock the audience. It completes the puzzle they didn't know they were assembling. But reveals are never neutral. Once the audience knows the truth, they demand interpretation. They ask what the double life meant. They ask why it mattered. They ask whether it was manipulation or contribution. They ask whether it was activism or strategy. They ask whether it was noble or opportunistic. The answer is more complex than the binary. Reiner's dual identity mattered because it demonstrated how modern power actually works. Not through brute force, not through policy alone, and not through populist charisma, but through narrative engineering. The future belongs to those who can make meaning out of chaos. Reiner mastered that long before America learned to name it. And now that the double life is visible, the public faces a final revelation, the one that sits beneath Cat Williams-style commentary and documentary speculation and social media analysis. Reiner didn't live a double life. The public lived a single illusion. The illusion that Hollywood only entertains and Washington only governs. The illusion that narratives are harmless and power is rational. The illusion that elections are about issues instead of emotions. The illusion that democracy is a debate instead of a performance. Until now. Rob Reiner didn't fool America. America fooled itself. For 30 years, the country assumed stories came from Hollywood and power came from Washington. Reiner simply lived in the space where those two ideas were never separate. His double life wasn't about secrecy, it was about fluency. He could speak the language of culture and the language of influence without switching accents. And in a century where narratives decide outcomes, that fluency became power. The reveal isn't that Reiner worked in politics. Plenty of celebrities have. The reveal is that he worked as if politics were cinema, with characters, arcs, stakes, and themes. And America absorbed those themes without realizing where they came from. Now the illusion is gone, the curtain is pulled back. The audience knows that the storyteller wasn't just entertaining them, he was preparing them. And when a storyteller prepares a nation for its own future, that isn't a scandal, that's architecture. The real twist isn't that Rob Reiner lived a double life. It's that he lived it so well the public didn't have a word for it until now.